Chapter 1. The Night That Changed Everything. The ballroom shimmered in low golden light, the kind reserved for high society and carefully curated grief. Grace Ellis adjusted the neckline of her simple navy dress and kept her posture tight, professional. It was her job, after all, to make events like this run seamlessly, even when the guests wore sorrow like designer perfume and smiled through champagne flutes. Tonight's gala was no ordinary event. It was the memorial fundraiser for Alexander Wolfe, the youngest brother of billionaire hotel tycoon Sebastian Wolfe. Gone too soon in a helicopter crash over Lake Geneva. Grace didn't know him personally, but she knew grief. She saw it in the pinched brows of the guests, the way hands lingered on champagne stems, the hush in the room even when the quartet played. And then there was him, Sebastian Wolfe, standing alone near the terrace doors, drink untouched, tux crisp and perfect like he was carved from a darker kind of elegance. Broad shoulders, impeccable jawline, expression unreadable, until she caught him looking at her. Once, twice, too long. Grace dropped her eyes and turned away. Don't be ridiculous, she told herself. He's grieving, and your staff. But still, her heart thumped harder than it had in years. Grace retreated to the side corridor for air. The scent of gardenias in the floral arrangements clung too tightly to the room, and the quiet ache in her chest had begun to hum louder than the string quartet. She didn't belong in worlds like this. Not really. She was just the planner, an invisible detail behind every candle flicker and monogram napkin. But tonight something felt off kilter. Like the story had taken a sharp left turn and no one had told her. She rested her palm against the cool marble wall and took a deep breath. You don't like these things either. His voice was rich, velvet woven through gravel. Grace turned. Sebastian Wolfe stood less than a foot away. Up close, his presence was nearly too much, tall, sharply tailored, and yet there was a weariness in his eyes that softened the command of his features. I'm sorry, she started, moving aside. I didn't mean to be in your way. You're not. She looked up at him then. Really looked. He wasn't putting on a show. He wasn't working the room. He was escaping, just like she was. They stood in silence, the din of the gala murmuring behind them. I usually leave early, she said quietly. But I'm the one who organized this one, so you did this. She nodded, heart thudding. Grace Ellis, event coordinator for the Four Seasons Midtown. He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he said, It's beautiful. Thank you. Pause. You knew my brother? No, she said gently. But I read everything I could. I wanted the night to reflect who he was. Sebastian nodded once, a flicker of something crossing his features. Not many people care enough to do that. I do. Maybe it was the grief. Maybe it was the sharp clarity of being two souls pushed to the edge of their own silence. But when Sebastian asked if she wanted a drink, she said yes. When he led her past the gala, past the eyes, through a private exit into the hotel's rooftop lounge, she didn't hesitate. Not because she was bold, but because, for the first time in years, something in her heart whispered, go. They sat beneath the stars. He told her stories about Alexander, how he'd collected coins from every country and wanted to open a children's literacy nonprofit, how he made fun of Sebastian for being too serious. And Grace, with her gentle voice and soft strength, listened without interrupting. That was the first gift she gave him, presence without performance. They didn't talk about her. She didn't want to ruin the rhythm. But she watched him slowly uncoil, word by word, until he wasn't the billionaire anymore. Just a man who had lost someone and didn't know how to carry the weight of it. At one point, when his hand brushed hers on the table, she didn't pull away. When his thumb lingered there, she exhaled a little too shakily. And when the silence stretched between them long and thick, Sebastian looked up and said, I don't do this. I don't escape. I know, she whispered. He looked like he wanted to say more, but then didn't. Instead, he stood, offered his hand, and Grace followed him. Back in his suite, the city glittered beneath the floor-to-ceiling windows, silent and golden. Neither of them rushed. Neither of them said what this wasn't. It wasn't love. It wasn't forever. But it also wasn't meaningless. It was something unspoken. Holy almost. Not in the church kind of way, but in the way grief wraps around loneliness and births something fragile and painfully human. Sebastian kissed her like he didn't know how to ask for comfort without tasting it. And Grace let him, not because she was naive, not because she wanted a piece of his empire, but because she saw the way his heart cracked open for a single moment, and she'd lived too long pretending hers couldn't do the same. In the morning, he was gone. A single white card sat on the nightstand. Thank you. S. No number. No false promises. No note about following up. Grace sat in the quiet suite, wrapped in his bathrobe, heart aching with the strange kind of sweetness only someone who'd grown used to being alone could understand. It had been real, just not permanent. And that had to be enough. 3 weeks later, it wasn't. Not when the second test came back positive. Not when her doctor confirmed it again with a warm smile and a hand on her arm. Congratulations, she said. You're having a baby. Grace left the clinic in a daze. The city was too loud. The lights too bright. This wasn't part of the plan. She wasn't ready. She wasn't equipped. She was 27, single, orphaned by 22, working paycheck to paycheck with no savings and a shoebox apartment. But when she got home and curled onto the couch, arms around her belly, a whisper rose in her chest. A verse she hadn't read in years, from a dusty old Bible she hadn't opened since college. Fear not, for I am with you. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. She cried then, not out of fear, but because for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel quite so alone. Sebastian Wolfe didn't know she was carrying his child, and Grace Ellis had no plans to tell him, because billionaires don't live in baby shoes and lullabies. And she wasn't about to sign her life away to a man who disappeared without even a goodbye. Chapter 2, 1 positive test and 1,000 questions. The morning after her second doctor's visit, Grace Ellis stared at the ceiling from her twin-sized bed, the pregnancy test still in its box on her nightstand like a ticking secret. She had known before the test. A gut instinct. A holy ache in her bones. Still, the confirmation hadn't settled the panic. It had only carved the fear deeper. A baby. His baby. And she was alone. The word felt louder in her tiny apartment than it ever had before. Grace had always been okay with solitude. After her parents died in a car accident her sophomore year of college, she had learned to carry her grief in silent, functional ways. To live on ramen, manage her emotions like a spreadsheet, and find comfort in libraries and secondhand bookstores. But nothing prepared her for this, for knowing there was life inside her and no one to tell. She sat on the floor of her living room, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of decaf tea, the kind she never drank but forced herself to now. She had already Googled everything: prenatal nutrition, local clinics, high-risk warning signs. Her search history looked like it belonged to a scared teenager, not a 27-year-old event planner with a college degree and an emergency fund of exactly $143. Her phone buzzed. Delilah, you're late for brunch. I swear, if you're still in pajamas. Grace replied, sorry. Sick. Can't come. A lie. But what else could she say? I'm pregnant with the baby of a billionaire I only spent one night with, and I have no idea what to do. Yeah, that would go well over waffles. That night, she opened her laptop and searched. How to tell a billionaire he's going to be a father. She immediately closed the browser. Because, truthfully, she wasn't going to tell him. Sebastian Wolfe didn't owe her anything, and she didn't want anything from him. What they'd shared wasn't nothing, but it wasn't a relationship either. It was a brief, aching intersection of two hurting people, and she had made peace with that. She told herself that 100 times, until one evening, when she walked past a newsstand and froze. There he was, on the cover of GQ Business, standing in a sleek navy suit outside Wolfe International's new Dubai Tower. Sebastian Wolfe, reinventing power, one city at a time. Beneath that, no time for family, no time for failure. Grace felt a pang she hadn't expected. No time for family. She pressed her hand protectively to her stomach, then turned and walked away. By week 8, the symptoms had worsened. Nausea in waves. Fatigue like her bones were filling with wet cement. Hormones running a one-woman riot through her tear ducts. She still showed up to work. Still managed events, smiled at brides, fixed wine-stained linens, and consoled crying groomsmen. But inside, she was unraveling. Quietly. One night, after an especially chaotic corporate banquet, her manager cornered her in the staff kitchen. Grace, Amanda said, arms folded. You're pale. You've lost weight. You can't keep skipping staff brunches. What's going on? Grace almost cracked. Almost said it. But the word stuck. She forced a tired smile. Just a bug. I'll bounce back soon. Amanda didn't believe her, but let it go. At week 9, she found a low-cost clinic for prenatal care. The waiting room smelled like hand sanitizer and old vending machine coffee. She filled out the forms, alone. A nurse handed her an intake clipboard and asked, "Do you want the father involved in any way?" Grace hesitated. Her pen hovered over the checkbox. Then she marked, "No." The nurse smiled gently. "You don't have to do this alone, sweetheart. We can connect you to support groups, housing programs if needed." "Thank you," Grace said, voice shaking. "I'll be okay." But walking home that night, tears blurred the city lights. Because she didn't feel okay. She felt brave, determined, but not okay. Then came week 10, the day everything changed. She was walking home from the bookstore when a black car pulled up beside her. Tinted windows, Manhattan quiet tires. A door opened, and out stepped Sebastian Wolfe. Grace's breath caught. He hadn't aged a second, still magnetic in that untouchable way. But his eyes, they were different. Sharper. Searching. "Grace," he said. She blinked. How did you?" "I need to talk to you," he said. Privately. People were staring. Grace hesitated, then nodded. Inside the car, silence pressed between them like glass. Until he broke it. "You're pregnant." Her throat dried instantly. "Who told you?" "I have security. Background checks. You work at one of my properties." Your name flagged. She stared ahead, furious and stunned. "So you had me followed?" "No," he said quickly. "Not followed. Watched. Briefly. To confirm what I already suspected." She turned to him. "And what gives you the right?" "I'm the father," he said, quiet but firm. "I have a right." Grace's hand flew to her stomach instinctively. "I wasn't going to tell you," she said. "Because I didn't think you'd care." "Well, I do." That stopped her. His eyes, stormy, tired, honest. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "But I'm not going to vanish again. Not from this." Silence. Then, "I have a proposal." Grace laughed bitterly. "Of course you do. You're a billionaire. It's not what you think." He paused, then met her eyes. "I want you to move in with me. For the remainder of the pregnancy." Grace blinked. "Excuse me. I'll provide everything, medical care, a place to live, stability. For the baby. And me?" He looked at her then, long and quiet. "You don't owe me anything. But I'd like to get to know you. And not just because of the child." Grace folded her arms. "Let me guess. You want to write the headlines before they write you. Turn the scandal into a narrative." "No," he said. "I want to be in my child's life. And I want to do it the right way. Even if it's complicated. Even if you hate me." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Because deep down, a part of her wanted to believe him. A small voice inside whispered, "Maybe this isn't about power. Maybe this is about redemption." She stared out the window, hands shaking. "This isn't a romance," she said quietly. "I know. And I'm not agreeing to anything without terms. Boundaries. Legal protection. I'll have my attorney draw it up. Not yours. Mine. I want everything in writing." Sebastian nodded once. "Done." She turned to face him fully. "This child isn't your legacy. This child is mine, too. And I won't let you buy your way into parenthood." His voice softened. "I'm not trying to buy anything. I'm trying to build something." Grace swallowed hard. She didn't trust men easily. She didn't trust power at all. But for the first time in weeks, the fear didn't feel quite as sharp. She was still scared, but no longer alone. That night, in her tiny apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed with her journal and wrote a single line. "Today, I stopped running. Not because I trusted him, but because I trusted myself." She placed her hand over her belly and whispered, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time since that pink line appeared, she believed it. Chapter 3. The Billionaire's Ultimatum. Grace Ellis sat on the edge of the buttery leather sofa in Sebastian Wolfe's penthouse, her posture tight, her duffel bag tucked beneath her knees like a shield. She hadn't expected this level of luxury. Towering glass walls opened up to a skyline view that stole her breath. The furniture was a curated blend of steel, velvet, and art that probably cost more than her yearly salary. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a five-star cage. "This is temporary," she reminded herself. Sebastian hadn't returned from his meeting yet. A housekeeper named Elena had shown her the guest room. Though let's be honest, nothing about that room screamed guest. It looked like it belonged in a French design magazine. Even the towels had his monogram. She hadn't unpacked. She wouldn't, not yet. 3 hours earlier, they had signed the contract. Grace had read every line. Twice. She made sure it didn't bind her to anything beyond shared residence and mutual involvement in prenatal care. She retained full custody unless otherwise modified post-birth. She had the right to leave at any point. No romantic obligations. No promises. Just cooperation. And still, when she slid her pen across the signature line, her hand trembled. Not because she was afraid of him, but because she was afraid of hope. The penthouse door clicked. Sebastian stepped inside, rolling up his sleeves as he did, jacket off, tie loosened. He paused when he saw her sitting there, duffel still untouched. "I thought you might have changed your mind," he said quietly. Grace stood. "I almost did." Their eyes locked. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then he moved past her into the open kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. "Did Elena show you around?" "She did." "It's a lot." "You're not impressed?" Grace looked at him. "It's beautiful, but I didn't come here for chandeliers and imported rugs." He nodded slowly, sipping his water. "I'm aware." Grace's eyes softened, just slightly. "I read the part in the contract about a monthly stipend. I don't want it. It's not a favor. It's support. You won't be working much longer, I assume." "I'll work as long as I can," she said. "I'm not fragile." "I didn't say you were. I'm offering stability." "You mean control." That made him set the glass down. "No," he said, measured. "I mean security. You and the baby are under my protection now, and I don't take that lightly." Her chest tightened at the word protection. It sounded nice, almost safe, but she didn't want to be another acquisition in his empire. He must have sensed her withdrawal because his tone softened. "You think I'm trying to run your life." "You're a wolf," she said. "You run everything." He smiled, just barely. "That's true, but not this." He stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough for her to feel the hum of something tense between them. "I'm not asking for your heart, Grace. I know what this is." She blinked. "What is it then?" "A chance to do the right thing." That night, Grace settled into the guest room, but didn't sleep. Her body missed her worn-in mattress and noisy radiator. Her soul missed the quiet she'd carved for herself over the years. The controlled solitude. The predictable life. But her baby was worth the risk. Worth the discomfort. Worth walking into the unfamiliar. She pulled out her journal and wrote. "Being brave doesn't always look like sword fighting. Sometimes it looks like standing in a billionaire's hallway holding your duffel bag and refusing to take hush money." The next morning, Grace woke to the scent of coffee and something warm. Eggs, maybe. She padded into the kitchen barefoot and found Sebastian, shirt sleeves rolled up again, flipping a pancake. She blinked. "You cook?" He glanced over his shoulder. "On Sundays." "It's Tuesday." "I made an exception." She couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. There was something disarming about seeing him like this. His hair slightly mussed, sleeves dusted with flour. She crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Trying to impress the pregnant woman?" He smirked. "Trying not to get sued for inadequate hospitality." She laughed, caught off guard, and then paused, noticing how his gaze dropped briefly to her stomach. She wasn't showing much yet, but she could feel the shift already. And apparently, so could he. He placed a plate on the counter in front of her. "I don't know your cravings yet." "So I guessed." Grace sat slowly, eyeing the blueberries forming a heart shape in the middle of the pancake. Her voice was quiet. "You're not who I expected you to be." He met her eyes. "Neither are you." Over breakfast, they talked. Not about the baby. Not yet. But about normal things. Her favorite childhood book and of Green Gables. His late-night guilty pleasure, espresso ice cream straight from the pint. The fact that he once failed public speaking in college and now ran boardrooms worth billions. It felt normal. But normal could be dangerous. Especially when hearts were involved. Later that week, they attended her next prenatal appointment. Together. It wasn't awkward, surprisingly. Sebastian sat beside her in the waiting room, reading over pamphlets on vitamin D and baby heartbeats like it was a board report. When the nurse called Grace in, he stood and followed without question. The ultrasound tech smiled at them both. "First-time parents?" Grace opened her mouth to correct her, but Sebastian beat her to it. "Yes," he said, reaching instinctively for Grace's hand. She froze, but didn't pull away. Not when the screen came alive and a flickering heartbeat filled the room. They both stared. Neither spoke, because in that moment, nothing needed to be said. The baby was real, alive, a part of them both. Grace felt tears burn behind her eyes. And when she turned to Sebastian, his jaw was clenched, his eyes glassy. He cleared his throat. That's incredible. It is, she whispered. And in that moment, she saw it. Not the billionaire, not the suit, not the calculated man who built towers and protected his image like a fortress. She saw the father. And maybe, just maybe, a man who wanted more than a contract could ever promise. That night, back in the penthouse, she found a note slipped under her bedroom door. I don't know how to do this, but I'm trying. S. And beside it, a tiny pair of newborn socks in pale yellow. Grace sat on the edge of her bed and wept. Not because she was overwhelmed, not because she was alone, but because for the first time, she wasn't. Chapter 4. Sign for the baby, not the man. Grace Ellis adjusted the sleeves of her cardigan as she stared at her reflection in the penthouse mirror. She'd only been living in Sebastian Wolfe's world for a week, but already she felt like she was walking a tightrope in heels she never asked for. Every day in this place, this glittering glass sanctuary, felt like stepping into a life meant for someone else. Someone who belonged. But she was here, and she was staying. For the baby, not for him. She reminded herself of that fact daily. That morning, she'd awoken to find a crisp envelope on the marble breakfast bar, bearing her name in Sebastian's neat, intentional handwriting. She opened it with cautious fingers. Grace, I'll be gone most of the day at board meetings and charity prep. Have Elena take you to the private maternity boutique on 5th. Everything is covered. S. She placed the note down, a sigh escaping. He meant well. Of course he did. His gestures weren't empty, but they kept tiptoeing toward a line she didn't want blurred. She wasn't his wife. She wasn't his partner. She was the mother of his child. And the contract between them, however civil, didn't include anything emotional. Still, she needed clothes. Her jeans were already fighting for air, and most of her cardigans were better suited to fall, not May. So she dressed modestly, pulled her hair back, and met Elena in the lobby. The boutique felt more like a spa than a store. Champagne-colored walls, soft instrumental music, gentle lighting that somehow made her feel more like a goddess than a bloated stomach. She tried to decline the free mocktail. She failed. Elena, ever the composed housekeeper/assistant, gave her space but never drifted far. Grace slipped into the first fitting room and stared at the hanging rack of maternity dresses, nursing bras, flowy tops that looked nothing like the clearance rack styles she was used to. She ran her fingers over the price tags. Most had more zeros than she made in a week. Don't think like that, she told herself. This isn't about clothes. This is about not feeling like a walking anxiety spiral every time you button your jeans. Still, when the attendant cooed over her adorable baby bump and offered a personalized consultation, Grace had to excuse herself to the restroom just to breathe. She called Delilah on the way home. Are you okay? Her best friend asked immediately. You sound like someone just offered you a diamond-encrusted stroller. Not far off, Grace muttered. He sent me to this boutique where the changing rooms probably cost more than my rent. Let me guess. Custom monogrammed baby blankets. And crystal buttons on the onesies. Delilah whistled low. He's pulling out all the stops. It's not romantic. I didn't say it was. But girl, this man sounds like he's trying. Grace swallowed hard. He's kind, protective, generous. But it's all for the baby. There was a pause. Do you want it to be for you? Grace didn't answer, because she wasn't ready for that question. Not yet. Later that evening, Sebastian returned home looking like he'd fought a boardroom full of lions. His tie was loose, his hair tousled, and his eyes lingered on her a little too long when she looked up from her book. You went, he said, nodding toward her soft lavender dress, the first maternity outfit that didn't make her feel like a balloon. She nodded. Thank you, but I'd like to choose my own stores next time. His brow lifted, surprised. I didn't mean to overstep. I know, she said, folding the corner of her page. But if I'm going to accept help, it needs to feel like help, not like I'm being curated. He blinked. Then, slowly, he smiled. Fair enough. They ate dinner across from one another at the oversized glass table that could seat 12. Tonight, it was just them. Salmon, wild rice, roasted vegetables that tasted like magic. Grace kept expecting the silence to feel heavy. Instead, it felt still, settled. I spoke with my legal team today, he said mid-meal. We're preparing a revised estate addendum. She looked up. For the baby? He nodded. I don't leave loose ends. She hesitated. You're already planning inheritance? I grew up in a family where legacy was law. I won't let my child grow up unsure of their place. Her heart clenched, not because she disagreed, but because there was something in the way he said it, like he was rewriting a pain he'd lived through. She set down her fork. What about their place? Not just in your will, but in your world, in your life. Sebastian's gaze held hers. That's the part one haven't figured out yet. And she believed him. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. She wandered into the sitting room, where city lights painted shadows on the walls. To her surprise, Sebastian was already there, shirtless, barefoot, a whiskey glass in his hand, staring out the window. She paused at the threshold. He turned, eyes soft. Couldn't sleep? She shook her head. He nodded toward the empty lounge chair beside him. After a beat, she walked over. She sat, quietly. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, I lost my mother when I was 7. Grace looked at him, startled. She had a heart defect. Died overnight. No warning. One day she was reading me bedtime stories, and the next. He trailed off. Grace's hand found the edge of her robe and twisted it. I'm sorry. He exhaled slowly. After that, my father made sure we were untouchable. No one got close. No room for softness. Only achievement. Reputation. He looked at her then. That's why this is hard for me. I know how to provide. I know how to control outcomes. But this? His eyes dropped to her belly. This is something I can't buy or fix or plan into submission. Grace whispered, maybe that's a good thing. He turned back to the window. I'm not used to things I can't control. I know, she said. He didn't speak again, but a silence grew between them. Not tense this time, but tender. And just before she stood to leave, she said softly, I signed that contract for the baby, Sebastian. But I'm still me, and I don't belong to your empire. I won't be bought. He looked at her, something flickering in his gaze. I don't want to buy you, Grace. Good, she said, voice steady. Then, quieter, because I won't be anyone's project, not even yours. She left him sitting there in the glow of Manhattan's midnight hum. And for once, she didn't look back. Chapter 5. His world, her walls. Grace stood at the edge of the Wolfe Foundation charity gala, trying to look less like a woman who would rather be at home with mint tea and a crossword. She wore a satin maternity gown in a shade of midnight blue, borrowed from a boutique Sebastian's assistant had suggested. The way it floated around her bump, barely noticeable yet now undeniable, felt strangely symbolic. The baby was no longer a secret, and neither was her presence in Sebastian Wolfe's life. Not tonight. She sipped sparkling water from a crystal flute and watched Sebastian move through the crowd like a king in his court. Charming, strategic, graceful even in a three-piece tux. He hadn't left her side since they'd entered the ballroom, but now he was cornered by 2 investors and a magazine editor who kept laughing a little too loudly. Grace, still new to the flash of cameras and carefully coded social cues, eased her back against the wall and took a breath. A woman in a red sheath dress approached, her heels clicking like punctuation. You must be Grace, she said, her tone dipped in polite curiosity. I'm Simone, Sebastian's ex. Grace blinked, then smiled faintly. Nice to meet you. Simone tilted her head. He's never brought a woman to one of these before. At least not one he acknowledged. There it was, the first punch of society's shade. Grace stood taller. We're not dating. Simone's red lips curved. Then it must be serious. She walked away before Grace could reply. Grace's spine stiffened. Her eyes found Sebastian again, and something twisted in her chest. Sebastian returned a few minutes later, noticing the tightness in her jaw immediately. Someone said something, he guessed. Grace didn't deny it. I'm fine, she said. This just isn't my world. His gaze searched hers. It doesn't have to be. Then why bring me? He hesitated. Because if I'm going to claim this child, I won't hide the mother. She swallowed. There it was again, his strange blend of nobility and cold logic. A man doing the right thing, with the wrong tone. And yet, her heart fluttered just a little. Back at the penthouse, she peeled off the dress, letting it slide to the floor with a soft sigh. She felt exhausted. Not physically, but emotionally. Like she'd been holding her breath all evening, afraid of stepping wrong, of saying too little or too much. She stared at herself in the mirror. She didn't look like the Grace she remembered. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe she was becoming something new. The next morning, Grace woke late. Sunlight streamed in through the gauzy curtains. The apartment was quiet, until a knock came at her door. She opened it in her robe to find Sebastian holding 2 mugs of tea. Truce, he asked. She arched a brow. We weren't fighting. No, he agreed. But I think we're both tired of pretending we're not uncomfortable. She stepped aside and let him in. They sat on the edge of her bed like awkward college roommates. I know last night was a lot, he said. You handled it better than I expected. Grace wrapped her hands around the mug. Your world is very glossy. He laughed softly. That's a polite word for it. I didn't belong. You did, he said instantly. They just don't know it yet. She looked at him, and for the first time since signing that contract, she let her voice drop its armor. I'm afraid. His brow furrowed. Of what? Of being absorbed into all of this. Of losing who I am. Sebastian nodded slowly, then set his mug down. You won't. You don't know that. I don't, he admitted. But I'll protect you, Grace. Not just physically, emotionally too. I'll protect your space, your identity, your freedom. She blinked, caught off guard. Why? She whispered. Because I know what it's like to be swallowed by someone else's world. There was a long silence. Then she reached out and placed her hand on his. Not romantically, not out of obligation, but as one soul recognizing another. Days passed, and something subtle began to shift. They ate breakfast together. They went to doctor's appointments. They talked. About the baby. About life. About what it meant to raise a child with someone you were still learning to understand. One afternoon, they walked along the East River Trail, Grace bundled in a cardigan, Sebastian in his usual black coat. A soft breeze teased her hair. It's kicking now, she said, pausing by the railing. He turned to her. Can I? She nodded. He knelt, not caring who saw, and placed his hand on her belly. A second later, his eyes widened. That was the first time you felt your child. He looked up at her, something raw in his expression. Grace. She placed her fingers over his. I know. And she did. Because this wasn't about contracts or custody or control anymore. This was about the fragile beginning of something new. That night, as she journaled in bed, she wrote, He's still a man of power. But I think, beneath the layers, there's a boy who never got to say goodbye to his mother. And maybe I'm not as alone as I thought I'd be. She closed the journal, her hand resting on her stomach. She could feel her walls softening. Just a little. And when Sebastian walked past her door and paused, she didn't pretend not to see. She simply smiled. And he smiled back. No words. Just the beginning of something quiet and real. Chapter 6. One Night, Two Secrets. It was nearly midnight when Grace found herself standing on the balcony of Sebastian Wolfe's penthouse, her robe wrapped tightly around her body, mug of chamomile tea in hand. The city stretched before her like a glittering blanket, buildings pulsing with life even at this hour. She loved this time of night, the space between yesterday's pain and tomorrow's unknown. Quiet. Still. Until the door slid open behind her. Sebastian stepped out, barefoot, shirt unbuttoned at the top, a glass of water in one hand. You okay? He asked softly. Grace nodded. Couldn't sleep. Me neither. He stood beside her, not too close, not too far. The silence between them wasn't tense tonight. It felt shared, trusted, like maybe the unspoken had started to find its voice. A soft breeze moved between them. She sipped her tea and finally spoke. You remember that night? He didn't ask which night. He didn't need to. He looked at her, that same steady expression he always wore, though his eyes told her more than his voice ever had. I remember everything. She looked down at the city. I'd just finished planning that wedding. The one where the mother-in-law tried to fire me because I forgot to order her favorite flavor of macarons. Sebastian smirked. I remember. You looked like you were seconds away from throwing a tray. I almost did. They both laughed quietly, and for a moment, the past sat beside them like a familiar friend. I didn't expect it to mean anything, Grace said after a pause. I didn't want it to. He didn't respond right away. I don't do flings, he said eventually. But that night, something about you. She turned to him. He met her eyes. You weren't impressed by me, he said. You didn't care about the name. The empire. You saw through it all. I saw the loneliness, she whispered. That made him go still. And then, quieter. You were the first person in years who didn't want something from me. Grace swallowed. And yet, I still ended up pregnant. He chuckled, but it wasn't unkind. Just worn. Real. It wasn't a mistake, he said gently. That made her heart pause. What do you mean? He turned toward her, leaning against the balcony rail. I mean, maybe we weren't supposed to last forever. But that night wasn't an accident. And neither is this child. Grace looked away, the tea trembling slightly in her hand. I wasn't ready, she said. I've spent my life holding everything together. I don't know how to let go long enough to let someone else in. Sebastian was quiet for a long beat. Then he said, I know something about that. He told her then, his secret, not about money or mergers or empire, but about his brother. Grace listened in stunned silence. When I was 16, my younger brother, Caleb, died. Sebastian said, voice low and even. Car accident. I was supposed to pick him up that night, but I was working on my internship application. She blinked. You didn't tell me this before. I haven't told anyone in years. Grace watched the muscles in his jaw tighten. My father covered it all up. Had lawyers pay off the story. Called it a family tragedy. But the truth is, it broke us. He looked down. My mom was already gone. And after Caleb, my father turned cold. Business was all we had left. It's all I am some days. Grace's heart pulled. She reached for his hand. I'm sorry. He squeezed it once. So when you say you don't know how to let people in, I understand. I've been there. I live there. They stood in silence again, hand in hand, the lights of Manhattan casting halos across the floor. Then Grace spoke, barely audible. I haven't told anyone either, she whispered. But the day I found out I was pregnant, I cried for 4 hours. Not because I didn't want the baby, but because it felt like another person I'd have to protect alone. Sebastian's fingers laced through hers. You're not alone, he said softly. She looked up at him, vulnerability flickering in her eyes. And something broke gently between them. Not romance. Not yet. But trust. The first, fragile brick of something real. The next morning, Grace woke up different. Not because the sun was shining brighter, or because the city felt less overwhelming, but because someone else now carried a piece of her story, and it felt lighter, like the ache wasn't hers to bear by herself anymore. Later that afternoon, Elena found her in the study, organizing nursery ideas on her tablet. There's a gentleman downstairs, she said. He asked for you specifically. Grace blinked. Who? Elena handed her a card. Ryan Clark, investigative reporter. Her heart stopped. She stood instantly. Don't let him in. And tell security not to let him back, ever. Yes, ma'am. Grace rushed down the hall and into the living room, her mind racing. How did he find her? What did he want? Sebastian was in the gym when she found him. He paused his workout, towel slung over his shoulder. Everything okay? No, she said. A reporter showed up asking for me. His expression changed instantly, jaw locked, shoulders squared. I'll handle it. No, she said. We'll handle it. He stared at her and nodded. That night, as they sat on the couch reviewing PR strategies and possible press leaks, Grace turned to him and said, We don't have to fake anything. He looked at her. I mean it, she said. We're not a love story. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But this baby deserves honesty. Sebastian nodded slowly. Agreed. And then, as she stood to go to bed, he said, I meant what I said on the balcony. She paused. I'm not letting you do this alone. Her heart thudded. She didn't look back, but she smiled as she walked away. Chapter 7. In the shadow of his name. It started with a headline. Wolfe, heir expecting child with former wedding planner. Grace stared at the screen in stunned silence, her breath caught in her throat. Her name was there, bold and unkind beneath Sebastian's, as if she were a footnote in his story. Inside Sebastian Wolfe's secret love life. From vows to the Wolfe estate. The planner who planned too well. She felt sick. The article included a photo of them at the charity gala. Sebastian's hand gently placed on her back. Grace in that midnight blue maternity gown, smiling faintly at something just out of frame. They looked intimate. Like a couple. Like a scandal. Grace closed her laptop with trembling hands. She hadn't signed up for this. She signed up for a baby. A home. Not the paparazzi or clickbait headlines. Not whispers in grocery store aisles or judgment from strangers who didn't know her name 5 minutes ago. And definitely not being painted as the woman who trapped a billionaire. Sebastian was already in damage control mode when she found him in his office, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and lethal. I don't care how it got out. You clean it up. Immediately. He looked up as she stepped in, eyes dark, jaw tight. He ended the call and stood. Grace. You said this wouldn't happen. I said I'd do everything I could to prevent it. She crossed her arms, heat crawling up her neck. You should have known better. Your life is a spotlight. Now I'm standing in it with no armor. I am your armor. No, Sebastian, you're the reason I need it. He flinched slightly, the words hitting deeper than she expected. A silence stretched between them. Then, softly, he said, "Do you regret this?" Grace blinked. Regret the baby? Never. I meant us. This arrangement. This house. Me. She looked away. Did she regret it? No. But she hadn't expected it to feel so out of control. I regret not realizing how loud your world is, she said. How quiet mine was before I stepped into it. He walked toward her, slow, careful. I can't change the past, but I can protect you now. How? I'll call a press conference. I'll set the record straight. Make it clear this was mutual and private, and anyone crossing lines will face legal consequences. Grace hesitated. And what will you say about me? His voice softened. The truth. That you're the mother of my child. That you're strong, brave, and undeserving of this kind of scrutiny. Something in her chest fractured. Not because he was perfect, but because he saw her. He chose to see her, not as a problem, but as a person. And somehow, in the mess of it all, that mattered most. The next morning, the news exploded again. But this time, it was Sebastian who held the microphone. Standing behind a press podium, flanked by security and Grace, he looked the world in the eye and spoke with clear conviction. Yes, I'm expecting a child. No, this is not a scandal. Grace Ellis is not a mistake or a headline. She is a woman of integrity and strength, and she deserves respect. Grace watched from the penthouse, her fingers trembling as she clutched a throw blanket. He didn't have to say her name, but he did. He didn't have to defend her, but he chose to. Elena walked past her with a tissue box and a proud smile. He's rewriting the Wolfe legacy in real time, Miss Grace. Grace gave a watery laugh. He's rewriting himself. Later that evening, Sebastian returned home. He looked tired, and somehow lighter. He didn't wait for her to speak. He simply stepped into the living room and sat beside her, his expression unreadable. I meant every word. I know. They sat in silence, the baby kicking faintly between them. Then Grace whispered, I'm scared. He turned to her. Of what? Of being swallowed whole. Of losing who I was before this. Sebastian reached for her hand. You don't have to become anyone else, he said. Not for me. Not for this child. Be you. That's enough. And somehow, coming from him, the man who controlled empires, those words landed like grace. They took a walk that night. No security. No assistance. Just the two of them, wrapped in coats, strolling along the quiet tree-lined path behind his building. He asked about her dreams. She told him. He listened, really listened. And then, beneath the soft glow of city lamplight, he said, I want our child to know this version of us. The one where we're honest. Real. Not headlines. Not titles. Just us. Grace smiled. You really think we can separate your name from all of this? He glanced at her. No, he said. But I think we can rise above it. Back in the penthouse, Grace curled into the couch, a book in her lap, the world just a little quieter. She wasn't naive. She knew there'd be more headlines. More assumptions. More people whispering behind designer sunglasses. But now she didn't feel so exposed. Not because the noise had stopped, but because she wasn't facing it alone. In her journal that night, she wrote, Sebastian's name once felt like a storm I didn't know how to survive. But now, I think it might become a shield. Not because he's perfect, but because he's willing to protect what matters. And for tonight, that includes me. Chapter 8. The day he called her family. The Wolfe estate was aglow with early summer light, its sprawling gardens manicured to the last tulip. Dozens of high-profile guests, investors, executives, celebrities, sipped champagne under the gleam of golden chandeliers and the soft hum of a string quartet. This wasn't just another Wolfe charity event. It was Sebastian's annual legacy dinner, the most exclusive night of the year. And for the first time in Wolfe Foundation history, Grace had been invited, not as a planner, not as staff, but as his guest, as the mother of his child, as someone who mattered. Grace stood at the top of the grand staircase, nerves humming beneath the surface. Her deep emerald gown, picked by her, paid for by Sebastian, hugged her baby bump with quiet pride. She hadn't wanted to come. She'd told him that. I don't belong in rooms with oil tycoons and tech moguls, she'd said the night before. But he'd simply met her eyes and replied, You belong anywhere I do. And somehow, that had silenced her doubts. Now, As she made her way down the stairs, all eyes turned. Cameras didn't flash. Wolfe events were airtight on privacy, but gazes lingered. Whispers circled. She heard the words. That's her. She's the one carrying the air. Isn't she just normal? But when her eyes found Sebastian across the room, standing tall in his bespoke tux, his presence commanding, he gave her a single, deliberate nod. Not for the room. For her. And Grace walked the rest of the way with her chin high. Dinner was a blur. Grace sat beside Sebastian at the head of the long table, surrounded by legacy names and old money. The air smelled of truffle oil and expectation. She didn't speak much, but she smiled when appropriate. She answered questions politely. She kept her hands folded beneath the white linen napkin. Until Sebastian stood. All conversation fell silent. He lifted a glass and began to speak. I've been asked many times why we hold this dinner every year. Why I continue my father's tradition even though I've rewritten so many of his other rules. He glanced around the room, steady, poised. The answer is simple. Legacy is not about wealth. It's about what we choose to pass on. A murmur of nods. He went on. This year, that choice is clearer to me than ever. Because I'm not only standing before you as the CEO of Wolfe Holdings, but as a father-to-be. Gasps. Murmured congratulations. More glances at Grace. Sebastian didn't falter. And tonight, I want to introduce someone who, though not yet bound to me by title or ring, is already bound to me by something far deeper. He turned to Grace. Her breath caught. Grace Ellis is not just the mother of my child. She is family. The room froze. So did Grace. Sebastian's voice was unwavering. She has challenged me, grounded me, protected what matters most before I even knew how. And I owe her more than gratitude. I owe her the truth. That I see her, that I respect her, and that she belongs not just in this room, but in my life. A long silence followed, and then applause. Stunned at first, but then stronger. Grace sat motionless, heart pounding. He had just called her family. Not for PR, not for protection, but because he meant it. Later, as the evening wound down and guests floated to the cigar lounge or the dessert terrace, Grace found a quiet alcove near the garden. Her hands trembled as she sat on the stone bench, trying to breathe through the whirlwind inside her. Sebastian found her there, tie loosened, expression unreadable. You didn't have to say all that, she said softly. I did. People will assume. I don't care. She looked up at him, the moonlight catching the sincerity in his face. Why now? She whispered. He crouched in front of her, one knee on the grass. Because for the first time in my life, I don't want to hide what matters. I spent years keeping my walls high. And then you walked in with Grace, ironically named, and tore them down without even trying. She felt the sting of tears. He reached for her hand. Family is something I lost early, he said. I don't want to lose it again before I even know how to hold it. Grace's voice wavered. I don't know what we are, Sebastian. I still have fears. Still have boundaries. You can have them, he said. I'll protect those too. She let out a small laugh through the tears. You can't protect me from your name. Maybe not, he said. But I can build something with you that doesn't hide behind it. She stared at him, heart aching with emotion she couldn't quite name. And for the first time, she didn't pull her hand away. Back at the penthouse, after the last guest had left and Elena had taken her leave, Grace curled on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Sebastian poured 2 mugs of peppermint tea, her new favorite, and joined her. She smiled. You're getting better at this. At what? This. Being gentle. He smiled faintly. I have a good teacher. She sipped her tea and looked at him, really looked at him. I don't know what we'll be in 6 months. Neither do I, he said. But I know I trust you. He looked at her, his voice low. That's more than I hoped for. And somehow, sitting there with the city beyond the glass and the baby stirring softly inside her, Grace felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe. Chapter 9. The night she asked him to stay. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment the city skyline was lit with calm evening glow, and the next, thunder cracked like a broken promise over Manhattan. Rain blurred the windows of the penthouse like smeared watercolor, and the world outside disappeared into grays and silvers. Grace stood by the nursery room window, arms wrapped around herself, watching the sky weep. She should have gone to bed, but something kept her rooted. An ache she couldn't name. The kind of ache that felt more like memory than pain. She pressed her hand gently to the curve of her belly. The baby moved, soft, steady, like a whisper saying, "I'm still here." And maybe that was what undid her. Not the storm, not the thunder, but the quiet proof of life when everything else still felt like uncertainty. Sebastian wasn't home. He'd said he would be late. Some meeting with board members that had turned into a dinner that had turned into a press call. Grace had said she understood, and she did. But understanding didn't make the silence easier. Especially not tonight. Especially not when her back ached, her ankles were swollen, and her emotions danced at the edge of exhaustion. She padded barefoot to the kitchen, half hoping Elena had left something warm in the fridge, and pulled out a bowl of lentil soup. She microwaved it, stirred it without tasting it, and sat in the dim glow of the breakfast nook. She should have felt proud, strong even. She'd made it this far on her own. But instead, she just felt lonely. By the time the clock neared 11, she had changed into soft gray pajamas, curled on the couch with a novel she wasn't reading, and turned off all the lights except the one near the hallway. She didn't expect him to come home. Not tonight. Not with everything else going on. But when the elevator gave its soft ding and the penthouse door slid open, her heart leapt. Sebastian stepped inside, his black coat damp from rain, his hair tousled, his eyes scanning the room like he already knew he'd find her awake. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Hey," she replied, setting the book aside. He slipped off his shoes, crossed the room, and paused just a few feet from her. "You should be asleep." "You too." He gave a half-smile, but it faded quickly when he saw her face. Something about her expression must have told the truth before her words could. He sat beside her slowly, careful not to invade space, but near enough to offer his presence. "You okay?" he asked gently. Grace hesitated. Then no. She didn't say it dramatically. She didn't cry. She just looked at her hands in her lap and whispered, "I feel like I'm unraveling." Sebastian said nothing, waiting. "I know this is what I agreed to. I signed the contract. I said I could handle it. But lately," she looked up, eyes damp. "I don't want to be in this house alone." His breath hitched, not because she was dramatic, but because she was honest. Raw, real, vulnerable. He turned toward her, his voice cautious. "What do you mean?" She blinked, tears threatening. "I mean, would it be crazy if I asked you to stay?" He studied her, long and hard, not with judgment, but with something like hope. "You mean tonight?" he asked. She nodded, heart racing. "I won't ask again, and I won't expect anything. I want someone here, not because I'm weak, but because tonight, I don't want to be strong alone." Sebastian didn't answer immediately, but then, without a word, he stood, removed his jacket, tossed it over the chair, and walked toward the guest bedroom. Grace's heart sank, until he returned a second later, with a blanket and a pillow, and placed both on the couch beside her. He sat down again, kicked off his socks, and leaned back. "I'll stay right here," he said, "as long as you need." She stared at him, stunned. "You're not sleeping in your own room?" He shook his head. "You said you didn't want to be alone." And he meant it. He wasn't showing up with conditions or expectations. He was just here, present, warm, willing. Grace leaned her head against the opposite armrest, her legs curled beneath the blanket. "Thank you," she whispered. Sebastian nodded once. "Anytime." They lay in silence for a long while. Thunder echoed in the distance. Rain tapped the windows like fingertips. And in the dark, Grace said something she hadn't said out loud before. "I think I'm scared to become a mother." Sebastian turned toward her, just enough to hear her clearly. She kept going, voice barely audible. "Not because I don't want to. I do. But because my mom was the strongest person I knew. And even she broke sometimes." He didn't interrupt. Grace swallowed. "What if I'm not enough for this baby?" Sebastian's reply came gently. "You already are." Her breath caught. "How do you know?" "Because every time you've had a reason to fall apart, you stayed." He paused. "And because I've never seen anyone fight as hard as you do to protect what matters." Grace blinked against the tears. Sebastian kept speaking. "I was raised in a house with cold love. I know what not enough looks like. And you? You're the opposite." She didn't speak for a long time. Then, softly, "Why are you so good at this now?" He gave a quiet laugh. "Because you asked me to stay." Sometime around 1 a.m., her breathing evened out. She'd fallen asleep on her side, hand resting gently on her belly, the blanket tucked under her chin. Sebastian didn't move. He watched her for a moment. Then he stood quietly, retrieved a glass of water, and placed it on the coffee table in case she woke up thirsty. He turned down the lights further. And then, without another word, he lay back down. Not as a CEO, not as a billionaire, just as a man who had been asked to stay, and chose to. In her journal the next morning, Grace would write, "He didn't say he loved me. He didn't have to. He just stayed. And sometimes, love begins there." Chapter 10. The Lie That Almost Broke Them. Grace woke to the scent of fresh coffee and the faint murmur of Sebastian's voice echoing down the hallway. For a fleeting moment, she smiled, remembering the way he had stayed on the couch, wordlessly, like a lighthouse in a storm. She reached for her robe and padded into the kitchen. He was there, at the island, phone pressed to his ear, back tense. "No. I told you, Grace doesn't know. That's not your call to make." A pause. Then sharper. "I'll handle it. Don't contact her again." The moment he turned and saw her standing there, barefoot and silent, the expression on his face shifted. Too quickly, from surprise to guarded. Something she recognized now. It was the look of someone who had just been caught. Grace's voice was quiet. "Who doesn't know what?" Sebastian hung up slowly. "Grace." She folded her arms, instantly cold. "What's going on?" He hesitated. And that silence, thick and heavy, was louder than thunder. "I was going to tell you," he finally said. "Just not like this." "Tell me what?" He exhaled hard. "The article. The leak. It didn't come from an outside source." Her heart dropped. "What do you mean?" "It came from inside the company. From someone I've kept close. Someone who was trying to protect my interests." Grace's stomach turned. "You mean someone you told?" His silence said it all. "You told someone," she said slowly, her voice sharp with realization. "Before I even agreed to move in. Before we had anything figured out. You told someone about the baby. I needed legal advice. Corporate contingency planning. You didn't need to tell anyone, Sebastian. You chose to. I was trying to keep it from becoming a weapon." She stepped back, shaking her head. "But it did become a weapon. And now I'm the one paying for it." He reached for her, but she moved out of his grasp. "You told me you were protecting me," she said. "But the truth is, you were protecting your empire. That's not fair." "It's not." Her voice broke. "You stood in front of 100 people and called me family. And all this time, you had someone monitoring me like a liability. I didn't see it that way. But that's what it was. And you didn't trust me enough to say it." Silence. Not the kind that holds peace. The kind that wraps around a wound and tightens. She turned away, her voice hollow. "You lied to me." "I didn't lie." "No." She looked at him, eyes glassy. "You just left out the part where I was being managed." He had no defense. Only regret. "Grace." But she was already walking to the bedroom. Not running. Just done. The door closed behind her. And for the first time in weeks, Grace felt the weight of the world settle right back on her shoulders. She stood in the middle of the room, arms wrapped around her belly. Her mind ran through every detail, every compliment, every promise, every time he'd said she wasn't alone. But maybe she had been. All along. He didn't come to her that day. Didn't knock. Didn't text. Didn't send Elena. And for some reason, that made it worse. By evening, Grace sat on the edge of the bed, journal in hand, pen motionless. The baby kicked softly, as if reminding her, "I'm still here." She whispered, "I know, little one. I know." But she didn't feel like she could carry both of them tonight. Not emotionally. Not with this ache in her chest. She thought about leaving. Packing a bag. Calling a car. Disappearing into a hotel for a few nights. But the idea of being away from the nursery, from the comfort of home, even if it wasn't emotionally safe, was worse. And that's when she realized something terrifying. She didn't want to leave. She wanted him to fight for her. To come in. To say something. Anything. But the hours passed. And the door stayed closed. It was nearly midnight when a soft knock finally came. She didn't answer. But the door creaked open anyway. Sebastian stood there, holding a box in his hands. Not flowers. Not gifts. Just a worn cardboard box she recognized immediately. Her wedding planning memories. Her business journal. Old client notes. Photos of centerpieces and lace swatches. It was the box she'd packed when she'd officially stepped away from work. He placed it gently on the ottoman and looked at her. "I didn't tell you what happened with the article because I didn't want to lose you," he said quietly. "But in trying to protect what I had left, I nearly destroyed what I had right in front of me." She watched him, silent. "I told myself I could manage it. Control the damage. But it wasn't about control. It was about fear. He stepped forward slowly. I was afraid you'd leave. That you'd realize this life, this house, this name, is too complicated. Too loud. It is, she said. I know. And I'm still here, she added softly. He exhaled. Because I want to be, she whispered. But not if I'm just a footnote in the legacy you're trying to protect. You're not, he said. You are the legacy. She blinked, throat tight. I haven't asked you to marry me, or even to stay forever, he said. But I should have told you that in my mind, you're not temporary. Grace stood, heart pounding. And in mine, she said, you're not untouchable. She stepped closer. I don't want perfection, Sebastian. I just want the truth. Even when it's messy. I can do messy, he whispered. She touched his hand, slowly. Then laced her fingers through his. Then let's start over. No contracts. No titles. No pretending. He nodded once, that quiet intensity returning to his eyes. Just you and me and a baby who kicks like she's got something to prove, he said. Grace laughed through her tears. And in that moment, she felt it again. The fragile beginning of something worth rebuilding. Chapter 11. A Father at the Baby Shower. The cafe-turned-baby shower venue looked nothing like the sleek penthouse or high-rise boardrooms Sebastian Wolfe usually inhabited. It was all pastel bunting and flower crowns. Tables draped in pinks and creams. On the chalkboard wall, "Welcome Baby Wolfe," celebrating Grace and her little miracle. There was no guest list of CEOs or shareholders. Just laughter, teacups, mini cupcakes, and more diaper jokes than Sebastian could have imagined. And yet, he was there, in the back of the room, silent, watching, and completely out of his element. Grace hadn't expected him to come. They'd talked the night before, sitting on the sofa, their feet tucked under opposite ends of the throw blanket. The peace after the storm of their argument had left room for gentler things. Tomorrow is just a small thing, she had said. You don't have to be there. I want to, he replied. She had blinked, surprised. It'll be a lot of floral pattern napkins and mocktail punch. He'd smirked. I'll survive. And now, hours later, he stood awkwardly in the back of the room, wearing his least intimidating jacket, arms crossed as if afraid to knock something over. Grace caught sight of him and smiled despite herself. At the table nearest the window, her childhood friends were fawning over ultrasound photos. That nose, one of them said, squinting. Totally Grace's. Excuse me, another added. But that jawline is 100% Wolfe Billionaire. Grace laughed, but inside her heart fluttered. Her friends didn't know what she and Sebastian were, or weren't, but they knew she was happier. They saw the difference, and it made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she was doing something right. Midway through the shower, someone handed Grace a wrapped box. It was from Anonymous, written in elegant silver script. She peeled back the wrapping to reveal a small photo frame. Inside, instead of a picture, there was a typed note. One day, she'll ask where she came from, and you'll have 100 answers. But the truest one will be, from love. Not perfect love, but honest love. Love that chose to stay. Grace blinked hard. The handwriting was familiar. Sebastian's. He didn't want credit. Didn't want to make it about him. But he wanted her to know. To feel seen. When the cake was served, raspberry cream with vanilla frosting, Grace noticed him still hovering near the back, unsure. She walked toward him, plate in hand. You look like you need rescuing. I thought I was doing a decent job blending into the wallpaper. Technically, the wallpaper is pink. He raised an eyebrow. So, you're in Navy. Sebastian sighed dramatically. Rookie mistake. She grinned and handed him the plate. He took a bite. Not bad. She folded her arms. Coming from a man who eats foie gras for lunch, I'll take that as high praise. He glanced around, lowering his voice. You know, I always thought these things were just fluff. Grace tilted her head, and his voice softened. But this feels like a celebration. Not of the baby. Of you. Of the kind of mother you'll be. Her chest tightened. He meant it. Without fanfare. Without pretending. She reached out and touched his sleeve, almost without thinking. Thank you for coming, she said. Sebastian's reply was quiet. Thank you for letting me. Later, the hostess stood to give a toast. To Grace, who has shown us what strength looks like when it wears soft clothes. And to Baby Wolfe, who's already chosen the best mother possible. Grace blushed, cheeks pink, eyes full. And then the hostess added. And to the man standing at the back of the room, who, despite having probably never seen a diaper cake before, showed up today not as a billionaire, but as a father. Everyone turned. Sebastian froze. Someone clapped. Then another. And another. Until the room echoed with gentle applause. He met Grace's gaze, unsure what to do. She just smiled. And nodded. So he bowed his head slightly, hand over his heart, as if to say, "Thank you. I'm trying." The shower wrapped with hugs and baby gifts. Grace stood in the doorway, saying her goodbyes, arms full of thoughtful trinkets and cozy blankets. When she turned, Sebastian was already loading her car with gifts, his sleeves rolled up, hair a little disheveled from the spring wind. "Need help?" she asked. "I think the baby swing weighs more than I do." She laughed. "You'll live." He looked at her, soft-eyed. "You were radiant today." She rolled her eyes. "I was sweating under that flower crown." "And radiant." Grace looked at him for a long beat. "You were brave." Sebastian blinked. "Me? You didn't belong in that room. Not naturally. But you made yourself belong. For me." He hesitated, then said something he hadn't said before. "I don't want to miss things," he admitted. "Showers. Doctor visits. First words. I want to be there. If you'll let me." Grace felt her throat tighten. "I'm still figuring out how to let people in," she said. "But you're already halfway there." They stood beside the car, street quiet, the scent of lavender and frosting in the air. And though no one said it out loud, that day changed something between them. Because it wasn't about obligation, or legacy, or names. It was about presence. And presence, Grace was learning, could heal things apologies never could. That night, back at the penthouse, she opened a card she hadn't seen earlier. It was tucked inside a baby book from a guest she barely knew. But the message inside brought tears to her eyes. Babies don't just change your life. They reveal the truth about it. The people who stay. The ones who show up. The ones who hold you when you don't even know you're breaking. She closed the book, blinking slowly, and looked up to find Sebastian standing in the hallway, watching her with a quiet tenderness. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, then whispered, "I think this baby is going to grow up knowing what love really looks like." He took a step forward. "Because of you." Grace smiled. "No," she said softly. "Because of us." Chapter 12. When he let down his guard. The night air was crisp, the city below glowing like a sea of restless stars. Sebastian stood on the penthouse balcony, sleeves rolled up, tie discarded, one hand gripping a tumbler of something he hadn't touched. Grace found him there just after midnight, barefoot, wrapped in one of his oversized cardigans, her bump gently rounding her silhouette. She didn't say anything at first. He didn't move. But something in the stillness of his stance told her that this wasn't one of his normal late-night silences. This was a silence born from memory, from pain, from a door left half open too long. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said quietly. "You didn't," Grace replied. "The baby did." He nodded, not taking his eyes off the skyline. She joined him at the railing, resting her elbows beside his. For a long time, neither spoke, until he said, "Do you ever feel like the whole world expects you to be something invincible?" She turned toward him, eyes curious. "Sometimes." Sebastian's jaw flexed. "My father used to say emotions were for men with nothing to protect." Grace blinked. "That sounds cruel." He gave a dry chuckle. He was a titan, a storm in a suit, the kind of man you wanted to impress, but always failed. She watched the way his hands tightened on the glass. "I spent most of my 20s trying to earn a nod from a man who only gave praise in deathbed confessions." He finally looked at her. "And I've spent the last few years making sure I never become him." Grace rested her chin on her hands, watching him. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Like someone who'd carried too many truths alone. Like someone who had finally run out of places to hide. He kept going. "I was 14 the first time I watched my mother leave for a retreat and not come back for 6 weeks. His voice stayed calm, but the tremor underneath it was unmistakable. "I used to think she just got tired of being around him. That maybe if I was better, quieter, she'd stay longer." He shook his head, eyes far away. "But I was just the collateral damage. Her love for him had faded long before I noticed. She stayed because she liked the last name, the power. And when he died, she mourned the empire more than the man." Grace swallowed hard. He wasn't just giving her a story. He was giving her the blueprint of who he'd become. "You know why I panicked when the pregnancy test came back positive?" he asked, voice lower now. "Because I saw every headline, every lawsuit, every betrayal. And I thought, I can't do this right. Not with my name. Not with my past. Grace looked at him gently. But you didn't walk away. I almost did, he admitted. Her breath caught. Not because I didn't care, he quickly added, but because I cared too much. And I didn't trust myself to not ruin it. She was quiet for a long time, then said, You've never ruined anything. He gave a humorless laugh. I've ruined plenty. Not this, she whispered. Sebastian turned toward her now, fully. His voice cracked at the edges. I don't know how to be the man you need. Grace reached for his hand, resting it gently over her bump. The man I need isn't perfect, she said. He just shows up, tells the truth, learns when he gets it wrong. He exhaled shakily. She leaned closer. And you're doing all of that. I still wake up scared, he admitted. So do I, she whispered. I still wonder if you'll walk out one day. I wonder the same. He looked at her, the shield of Sebastian Wolfe slowly, visibly, crumbling. I'm tired of pretending that I've got it all figured out. Grace's eyes glistened. Then stop pretending. She took both his hands now, drawing him closer. Let me in. Not into your empire. Into you. He looked at her for a long beat. Then, finally, he let go. Of the control. Of the pride. Of the script he always followed. He leaned into her, resting his forehead against hers, breathing like he hadn't in years. And Grace, without hesitation, wrapped her arms around him. She felt the shudder in his chest. The way he softened against her. The man who'd built towers across cities was now crumbling in the arms of the woman who had never asked him to be anything but human. I don't remember anyone ever holding me like this, he said. She tightened her arms. Then let this be the first time. He nodded against her shoulder, the world outside still spinning, but something inside him finally, blessedly still. They sat together on the couch after that, neither saying much, the only sound the occasional kick from their little girl making herself known. Sebastian rested his hand on her belly. She kicks harder when you're around. He smiled, eyes tired. She's already got opinions. She gets that from you. Unlikely, he said softly. She'll get your fire. Grace looked at him, eyes soft. Maybe she'll get the best of both of us. He leaned back, pulling the blanket over them both. Then maybe we've already done something right. She fell asleep with her head on his chest, and for the first time in decades, Sebastian Wolfe didn't feel like he had to earn the right to be loved. He simply let himself be. Chapter 13, when she chose him to. Grace stood in the middle of the nursery, a tiny white onesie in her hands and sunlight pouring through gauzy curtains onto the hardwood floor. The bassinet was in place. The mogul spun slowly above it, soft pastel clouds dancing in circles. Everything looked ready. Everything felt ready. Except for her heart. And maybe that was finally starting to change. It had been a week since the night Sebastian let down his guard. Since he told her about the weight of being his father's son. Since he stopped pretending. And somehow, that had made all the difference. Not because she needed him to be broken, but because she needed him to be real. And now that he had been, she saw him differently. Not as a billionaire. Not even as the father of her child. But as hers. In a way that felt earned, not arranged. The nursery was quiet. But her thoughts were not. She set down the onesie, took a breath, and walked out of the room, her bare feet making soft sounds on the floor. In the hallway, she passed the portrait Sebastian had moved from his father's office to the guest room. Too much pressure, he'd said. The man was everywhere. Now, there was a framed photo of the baby's first ultrasound in its place. That alone had said more than words. He was trying. And more than that, he was becoming. She found him in the kitchen, not commanding a conference call, not scanning headlines, just leaning against the island, coffee in hand, reading a baby development book with genuine curiosity. Grace paused in the doorway, watching him, and knew she was ready to choose him. Not out of necessity, not out of fear, but because love isn't just something you feel. It's something you decide. He looked up and smiled. Good morning. Hey, she said softly. He walked over to her, brushing a kiss to her forehead. Baby and mama okay? We're good. He raised an eyebrow. That sounded suspiciously neutral. She bit her lip, trying not to smile. I was wondering if you had time to take a walk with me. Sebastian blinked. Now? Yeah. I can reschedule a call. She shook her head. No need to reschedule. I just want it to be you and me. No agendas. He closed the book, set it aside, and nodded. Lead the way. They walked through Central Park, quiet under a canopy of early spring leaves. Grace held onto his arm. Not because she needed help walking, but because it felt right. They passed joggers and nannies and children feeding ducks by the water. They sat on a bench near the lake, a little removed from the main paths. I used to come here when I first moved to the city, she said, before everything got complicated. Sebastian tilted his head. What did you like about it? I don't know. Maybe because here, no one cared who I was. I could just breathe. He was quiet, then said, I've spent my whole life trying to be someone. And the only time I've ever really exhaled is when I'm around you. She turned toward him, heart fluttering. He meant that. He wasn't saying it to impress her. He was saying it because it was true. Grace looked out at the water, wind brushing through her hair. Do you remember the day I found out I was pregnant? He nodded. Of course. You said we'd figure it out. That you wouldn't let me do this alone. I meant it. She looked at him now. You kept your word. His throat tightened. She kept going. I've thought a lot about that. About how easy it would have been for you to walk away. For me to do this on my own. Sebastian stayed silent, eyes on hers. But you didn't walk, she said. And neither did I. She took his hand, folding it into hers. I think that matters more than anything. He exhaled slowly, searching her face. What are you saying? She smiled, eyes glassy. I'm saying I choose you, Sebastian. His breath caught. I don't need a ring. Or a ceremony. I just need to know that when things get hard, and they will, we'll choose each other again. And again. He stared at her, something reverent in his expression. You're the first person who's ever chosen me just as I am, he said. Grace ran her thumb along his knuckles. That's because you finally let me see who you are. They walked home hand in hand. Not rushed. Not afraid. Just together. That night, Sebastian made dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and garlic bread and a salad she swore he Googled. They ate in the kitchen with jazz playing low in the background, the city buzzing just beyond the window. And then, without preamble, he pulled something small from his pocket and slid it across the table. Grace picked it up. It wasn't a ring. It was a charm. A tiny gold G on a thin chain. For your daughter, he said, when she's old enough. So she remembers her mother's strength. Grace blinked back tears. She reached for him across the table, heart full. She'll wear it. But I'll keep it until she's ready. And you? He asked. I already have what I need, she whispered. You sure? She smiled. I have you. That's more than I ever thought I'd get. They didn't make a formal announcement. There was no grand post or speech. But from that day on, the city saw less of the cold billionaire and the single mother, and more of something softer, more whole. In her journal that night, Grace wrote, I didn't fall in love like they show in the movies. I built it. One truth, one mistake, one choice at a time. And now, I don't just have a partner. I have a future I believe in. Chapter 14, The Beginning of Forever. The elevator doors slid open onto the penthouse, spilling sunlight and the scent of something sweet from the kitchen into the marble hallway. Grace stepped in slowly, her fingers curled gently around a brown paper bag filled with croissants, her heart still light from the morning walk. She had gone out alone, something she hadn't done in a while. Not because she couldn't, but because, for the first time in a long time, she hadn't needed to be anywhere else. She belonged here now, not as an accident. Not as a placeholder, but as a woman who had chosen, and had been chosen in return. Sebastian looked up from the sofa, where he was half dozing with a newspaper on his chest and a baby book open beside him. You're back, he said, sitting up. His hair was tousled, his shirt untucked. She smiled. You slept in. I'm trying out this whole Saturday is for rest theory. She held up the bag. Croissants for the man attempting normal human behavior. He reached for the bag like a child given a gold medal. This might be the greatest act of love I've ever witnessed. Grace laughed and set the bag down beside him, then curled up at the other end of the couch, tucking her legs underneath her. I saw a woman in the park today, she said, with 2 toddlers and a stroller and a dog leash tangled around her wrist. Sebastian bit into a croissant. Sounds like a sitcom waiting to happen. She looked happy. Exhausted, but happy. He tilted his head. Did it scare you? Grace thought for a moment. No, it made me curious. Curious? She smiled. About the kind of life we'll have. The noise. The chaos. The impromptu snack explosions in the back seat of the car. Sebastian pretended to shudder. I'm not emotionally prepared for crackers in the glove compartment. Grace grinned. You'll survive. They sat in silence for a while, just the two of them and the soft hum of the city outside. Every once in a while, Sebastian would glance her way, as if checking to see if she was still there. She was, and she wasn't going anywhere. After breakfast, they wandered into the nursery. Sebastian stood by the crib, running his hand over the edge of the wood, freshly painted in a warm ivory hue. "You know," he said, "I bought this without knowing if you'd even stay." Grace came up beside him. "I stayed." He looked at her, eyes searching. "Do you ever regret it?" She paused, then gave the softest answer. "Not even once." He turned and reached for her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I didn't know what love was," he said quietly. "Not really." She met his gaze. "I used to think love was a transaction. You give, you receive. You perform, you're accepted." "And now?" she asked. He rested her hand against his heart. "Now I know love is what's left when the transaction ends." Grace blinked back sudden tears. "You taught me that," he whispered, without asking for anything in return. She leaned her forehead against his chest. They stayed that way, breathing, still, together. Later that afternoon, Sebastian disappeared into his office for a while. Grace didn't ask what he was working on. She simply trusted him. That trust felt like a new thing. Not the kind that waited for a contract or a grand speech, but the kind that grew quietly, watered by truth and time. When he returned, he was holding a notebook. Leather-bound. Familiar. He sat down across from her and opened it. It was her old journal. The one she'd used when she was still trying to process the pregnancy, the scandal, the fear. "I found this last night," he said. "You left it on the bookshelf." Grace's cheeks flushed. "You read it?" He nodded. "Not all of it. Just the last few pages." Her heart skipped. "I didn't mean to intrude," he added quickly, "but I saw the words. If he ever really sees me, I'm afraid he'll walk away." Grace looked down, fingers tightening around her tea mug. "I wrote that before I knew you," she said. "I know." And Sebastian reached across the space between them and took her hand. "And I saw you. Every part. And I didn't walk away." He paused. "I won't ever walk away, Grace." The words settled into her like sunlight. Slow, gentle, certain. Later that night, the rain came, soft at first, then heavier, a steady rhythm against the glass windows of the penthouse. Sebastian lit a fire in the sitting room, and Grace curled beside him on the rug with a blanket over both their legs. He pressed a kiss to her temple and whispered, "Tell me what forever looks like to you." She thought for a moment. "It looks like messy mornings and mismatched socks. It looks like grocery store runs and baby cries and inside jokes we'll have to explain to our daughter someday." Sebastian grinned. "She's going to be spoiled. She's going to be loved." He nodded, then said, "Forever looks like you. Right here. Every version of you. The one who's scared. The one who's strong. The one who still doubts. I want them all." Grace looked at him, full-hearted. "Then forever is yours." They didn't need rings or promises spoken in front of witnesses. That night, their vows were unspoken, written in the way he held her, in the way she didn't flinch, in the way they built something out of the ruins of almost was. Epilogue, 3 months later. There are some moments in life that split time in two, before and after. For Grace, that moment came on a Tuesday morning, just as the first golden rays of spring painted the nursery walls. It wasn't the way the wind rustled the ivy outside the window, or even the scent of fresh lilacs she'd placed in a vase by the crib. It was the cry, that high, fierce, soul-splitting cry. 1 second, she had been bracing against the labor pains, fingers tangled with Sebastian's, the world reduced to breath and fire and sweat. The next, her daughter was in her arms. Warm, small, real, and everything changed. 3 months had passed, and life had rearranged itself. The penthouse was no longer a quiet, sterile fortress in the sky. It was now full of coos and lullabies and squeaky toys that always managed to roll under the coffee table. And Sebastian Wolfe, the billionaire once known for boardroom takeovers and icy headlines, he now knew how to swaddle. Badly, but with effort. He had become a man who didn't just show up, but stayed. The baby, named Evangeline Hope Wolfe, had eyes like Grace's and her father's impossible jawline. She was a firecracker in a onesie, already ruling the world with her cries and tiny fists. And somehow, amidst the chaos, Grace had never felt more at peace. On the morning of Evangeline's 3-month milestone, Grace sat on the nursery rocker, humming as the baby drifted off against her chest. Sebastian entered quietly, a steaming mug in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. "She's out," he whispered. "Barely," Grace replied, smiling. He handed her the mug, her favorite herbal blend, and sat on the floor beside the rocker, legs crossed. "What's that?" she asked, nodding at the paper. He unfolded it. "I wrote something. Last night, after you fell asleep." Her eyebrows lifted. "A speech. A letter. For Evie. For when she's older." Grace's eyes softened. "Can I hear it?" Sebastian nodded and began to read. "Dear Evie, you won't remember the first time you cried, but I will. I'll remember the way your mother held you, her face shining with strength and wonder. I'll remember the way the room stilled when you opened your eyes. And I'll remember the moment I knew everything I used to chase meant nothing because I had you. You were born into a world of noise, but you brought with you a silence that healed. I promise to be the kind of father who listens, who learns, who fails, and shows you it's okay to get back up. And I promise to love your mother in a way that teaches you what love should look like. Honest, unshakable, and never rushed. We won't always get it right, but we will never stop trying. Because love isn't a moment. It's a lifetime of choosing. And we choose you. Always. Love. Dad." Grace's throat closed as he finished. She looked down at the sleeping baby, then at Sebastian. And the tears came softly, silently. "Do you have any idea what kind of man you've become?" she whispered. He smiled, still figuring it out. "Well," she said, "this man is everything I didn't know I needed." They spent the afternoon on a blanket in the rooftop garden, Evangeline nestled between them, kicking her legs and blowing bubbles. They didn't talk about business, or the past, or the chaos it had taken to get here. They just were. Present. Full. Joyful in the way only healing can bring. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Sebastian leaned back on his elbows and looked at Grace. "Have you thought about the future?" She looked over, curious. "Which part?" "All of it." Grace smiled, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. "I think it'll be loud, and messy, and wonderful." Sebastian took her hand. "And together?" She looked at him. "Always." That night, after Evie had been fed and changed and tucked into her bassinet, Sebastian pulled Grace into the kitchen. "Close your eyes," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Is this where you tell me you bought an island and were moving?" He grinned. "Tempting. But no." She closed her eyes. He placed something light and delicate around her neck. "Open." Grace looked down. A gold charm necklace. But not just the G from before. Now it had 3 letters. G, S, and E. Grace. Sebastian. Evangeline. Her heart swelled. "I didn't want a ring," he said. "Not yet. But I wanted you to have something that said what I haven't found the perfect words for." She touched the necklace, eyes shining. "You just did." They stood there, swaying to the sound of the baby monitor's gentle hum, wrapped in the warmth of a kitchen and a life they had built not from a plan, but from every broken, beautiful, brave moment they'd shared. Before, she had been afraid. Before, he had been guarded. But after the scandal, the pregnancy, the risks, the conversations, the truth, they were no longer just a headline or a scandal's echo. They were a family. Imperfect, unfiltered, but undeniably real. And that, Grace thought as she looked at the man who had once only been a storm in her sky but had become her anchor, was what forever really looked like. The end. Thank you for listening to The Billionaire's Baby Scandal. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing to Ever After Audiobooks. Because every heart deserves a story worth believing in.